Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Alumni Talks. My name is Elias. I'm here today with Matt. Matt works at Keepsake Games now on a game called Hyperspace or Jump Crew, or they're not really sure yet, but from what I've seen from it, looks super cool. And he works as a game designer, interned there as a level designer before, and graduated or stopped studying is maybe the more precise term here in 2020, I think. Yes, Matt and I were in the same class, so we started 2017 in Gotland and graduated 2020. And yeah, super cool to have you, Matt.
Good to be here.
Nice.
Hi.
Did I miss anything, or do you want to say it?
No, not at all. I'm a level game designer. I'm also a board member of the GWU, the Swedish Game Developers Union. We're still pretty new, but essentially we're an environment for game developers to share knowledge and information and discuss different topics, and also a space where developers from abroad who want to work in Sweden or who just started working in Sweden can also get help and valuable information on how to make it work. Yeah.
Cool. And we might talk about that a bit later, but first let's kind of start at the beginning. How did you end up on this lonely island in the middle of the Baltic Sea? What got you to Visby and to Gotland?
Well, so I studied game design in high school in LBS in Helsingborg, and after that, I at the time I wanted to be an artist, so I went abroad to study art, and when I eventually decided that I want to kind of pivot towards game design, which I was already doing for many years, I met a classmate, an old classmate from high school, who was studying in Visby at the time as an artist in the arts department. And he told me about the education, and he showed me a bunch of cool games from GDC that people made in his year, and I was instantly hooked. So it was a recommendation from a friend. So
Nice.
Just a few months later, I was in Visby.
Nice. And that person, he studied in the year ahead of us, or even before that when it was in all Swedish?
I believe that was 2 years ahead of us.
Okay, so still in the all Swedish education. Cool. Yeah. And how come you picked project management and not graphics as a minor? Because I mean, didn't talk about that, but your minor was project management. So how come you picked that over graphics?
Right. So before that, I wanted to do illustration or concept art or something related to that. And when I kind of decided to pivot more towards game design, first of all, I had no idea that you had to be. It was Swedish only when signing up for the game design department. So I didn't know about it. I actually applied as a foreigner, even though I have a Swedish citizenship, because I applied through the English website. So I didn't even know there was a game design only program. So it was basically between art and management for me. And I thought, hey, I always wanted to work in games, but I already pivoted once from art to, or I was about to do that pivot. So I thought, hey, in case this happens again, project management would be something really, really valuable to know, regardless whether I, end up making games in the future or not. It was a bit of a fail-safe. And at the time, I was silly enough to think that I would be, capable of actually starting my own, business eventually. So that also kind of played into that. But yeah, I had no idea you could just be a game designer in Visby. Wasn't on my list for the foreigners application.
Yeah, no, same with me. Maybe it worked out for the better, who knows. But how, to what extent do you think being in the PM minor did help you now, kind of in your journey to where you are now? And I mean, we'll get a bit more into how that journey looks like, but did your plans actually work out? I mean, you've said you got scared out of making your own studio, but at least did you learn some meaningful skills in the PM minor?
Well, I didn't get scared of it during my time in Visby. It was actually after when I got a bit more serious about trying to do that. But I think I definitely got a lot out of it, especially the fact that I was still, majoring in game design. I still got to be a game designer. I still got to, dip my toes in it, so to speak. But the beauty of it was that I got, a bit more perspective, since sometimes, even though I was always involved in the development process, a lot of times I had to, kind of take a step back to, be a project manager, as you kind of have to. So I got to see a lot of things that I think I wouldn't see if I was, working under another project manager. I had to, make difficult decisions and sometimes make people unhappy, and learn how difficult it is to delegate work sometimes and just cut things, and learned it very much the hard way. And just the kind of responsibility of making your own decisions and then just dealing with whatever happens when those decisions actually come into play, which definitely helps a lot with my work now, because I have a job where I have a lot of ownership over what I do, and I make a lot of my own decisions. So I think that kind of helped me with that. I don't have to be as reliant on someone making a decision for me, for better or worse.
Because like back in your education or during the education, you spent a lot of time on a more strategic kind of higher level, thinking about problems in the game and in the team. So
Sure.
yeah. Can you give it, because you mentioned a bit, okay, you saw things that maybe if you were head down grinding it out as an artist or something, you wouldn't have noticed. Can you give a bit more of a concrete example what some of that might have been?
I think in the end, it comes down to kind of seeing the bigger picture, like being able to see how a certain design decision or a feature or just, approach to solving a problem or a workflow in general, how it kind of affects things in the long run. Having to, look, okay, we have a 2-month project. The things we do and the way we do certain things in the first week or two of production or pre-production, that will affect the outcome in this way and this way and this way. And it kind of forced me to think ahead and try to be conscious about certain things. And it's not like I became especially great at it. I had my share of flops and games that weren't good, but it definitely, made me think about certain things. Is that specific enough, or?
I mean, I'll always take it more specifically if you have like a very a concrete situation that you remember, or a decision that you remember, or an insight where you're like, okay, the artist wanted to do this, but I thought, like, I don't know.
Right. Yeah. So I think one of the best examples is from the probably infamous Flop the Shark. You probably remember. To those who don't know, it was like an arcade game where you control beached sharks with controllers that are basically sharks that you physically flop. Completely ridiculous. And we only had one programmer, which was a huge task for one person to figure out how to make motion controllers work and then program all the features and everything. So since we did the overhead plan for the whole project and had all the features planned out, and obviously we started cutting things, but there were some things that we were very reluctant to cut because we wanted features. What we didn't think about is that the game was fun without them already. The game, people were already enjoying it, and we focused on adding features that sure could, they would definitely make the game better, and they added a lot. But in the end, because of all those features, we ended up having a couple bugs that caused the game to break like a day before GDC, before we were on the floor. And we spent basically the whole first day of GDC, GGC, excuse me. We spent the entire first day just trying to get it fixed with our poor programmer, Carl, sitting on the floor behind a booth with his laptop. Also, since we built the game to be flipped 90 degrees, so it was vertical. So he had to test it sideways. So he became a master at, using his PC flipped 90 degrees. And that can really, like, this is something that I often think about, because if we just cut some extra features, the base game would be better. So now I try to be quite conscious about, work that goes into adding something, and just generally trying to think if something is even worth adding at least at that specific point at all, because sometimes if you just tweak things you already have, you might not even need a new feature, right? Like less is more.
Addition by subtraction, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, especially for Gotland Game Conference arcade games, right? It's very like, people don't play them for 15 minutes, so you don't need a bunch of features to keep people interested, to keep them hooked, to keep them playing, coming back, etc. They come there, they goof off like wiggling a shark around for 2-3 minutes, having a good time, everyone around them is laughing, and then they move on. And it's more important that your game like doesn't break rather than...
Exactly. And it's funny you say that, because it's still something I struggle with at work now, is that sometimes I just make too much stuff. There, like every few weeks, I have a couple hours or sometimes a day where I just go back to levels I already built for our game, and I just remove stuff from them and just add walls where there's openings and stuff, and just make them smaller and tighter and more compact, and they just improve. I did it a bunch this week already, just removing stuff from my old work, and it's just instant improvement. So it's definitely something I still struggle with. It's not like I found this ultimate solution on how to make my games or my work better. It's kind of something that you kind of have to deal with, ongoing.
Do you have a tip kind of maybe for people like making games right now during the education? Because what you mentioned now, right, this is maybe a luxury that you don't necessarily get when you work on arcade or vertical size, where you can build something and then come back a month later or 3 weeks later and like look at it with fresh eyes. Can you think of a way how a team could put themselves in a situation or create a situation where they are forced to kind of critically examine their game and think about, okay, what can we remove, what can we cut? Is there I mean, maybe I'm putting you on the spot a bit, but like is there something, is this something that where you figured out some sort of system with your teams while you were working here or later when you were doing more studying in future games, where you got into some sort of groove, some sort of rhythm, some sort of system to kind of bring the cutting axe out and look at your game with a critical eye? Do you have any tips around that?
That's a very difficult one, because each project is different and each team is different. I don't think there is like a magical solution, I'm afraid, but I mean, you probably remember the SWOT analysis we were taught in the project management classes.
Strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Yes. I think as basic as it is, I think this is always a really good way to look at things. Like, try to really figure out what is the core of your experience, and try to do as little of everything else as possible. Like, you could probably have a really cool game where you can just run and move the camera, as long as that goes into what you're planning to do. You don't necessarily need I don't know, enemies or combat or AI or whatever. Try to really understand your own game. I think that's the problem I encountered the most during student projects, was that I would make games and not necessarily be fully aware of what that game was supposed to be. And I was trying to figure out what it is as you go. And obviously that's part of the process. But the more you know about your, like, the end goal, the easier it is to cut things, because you just have a better understanding of what you're doing. And of course, it's really cool to be able to sit down and be like, hey, we're just gonna experiment. We're not gonna care. We're just gonna do, we want to try some things out. That's always awesome, but that's a risk that you're taking then. by hoping that you figure those things out during the process and be able to put it together at the end, because you probably will figure out what you want and what you need. Question is, will you be able to do it, when you hit beta and you have, X amount of time left to wrap it up, or, are you going to finish all the features, but are you going to have bugs? For me, bugs were always the issue. The game would be cool, it would be working, it was more or less what we wanted, with, some things cut, but there were bugs and it wasn't fun in the end, because, the bugs were destroying the experience.
So the tip is a bit like focus on the strengths, mitigate the weaknesses wherever possible, but don't get distracted by the opportunities and threats, because those are like things that, especially for a 10-week project, you're just getting into trouble worrying about either of those in a way.
Exactly. I think you put it a lot better than I could. But yeah, no, I think you're on the money with it. Like, especially since, sometimes you start working on a project and you have an idea for it, but then you make a mechanic and you realize that mechanic is better than anything else. And maybe you want to pivot towards that. Like, try to figure out what is the fun factor in your game. I know fun is like a bad word.
I was gonna say there is no such thing as fun, Matt. Yeah, we could get into that discussion. It's like,
let's say differently then. Try to figure out what is the hook of your game, right? Try to figure out what is that makes people want to play it, or makes people excited, or like, just watch people's faces when they play your game and try to see when they look engaged or excited or happy, and go from that. Because sometimes a small part of your game can be what it gives people the most joy, and maybe that's what you should focus on.
And as a tip for all current students, we actually nowadays have really cool software that you can use and test your game with, where the webcam can do some AI magic and see the emotions players have while they're playing. And you can like match that up with the recording of the game, and so you don't have to actually look at people play your game anymore. You can dodge the cringe and just put them into a room and have them play. So
send link, please.
Yes, no, I can hook you up with that as well. No, but yeah, I think another thing, and okay, maybe let me phrase it this way. Right now, what is the thing that in your job and also in your journey, and we can talk about that a bit more. So you left Gotland, and then you went to Stockholm and did 2 years at Future Games there afterwards, right? I call it like a practical master's degree in a way, right? But what of the experiences that you've had here on Gotland at the education, what of that is still with you today? What do you still cherish? What's the sort of a lesson you learned or an experience you had that's really impactful still, or that you come back to using on an everyday basis?
That's a really tough one, because I think there's a lot of things, and I could probably spend like an hour talking about it. I mean, the people I've met is definitely a big part of it. I met my best friends there. I met a lot of people that I'm still in touch with occasionally, and I was able to actually see people play my game live, and that's, for me, that's really big, because it's one thing if you make a game in an education and then other students play it, and maybe some teachers or some game developer that was brought in for feedback and stuff like that. But it's very different when you see complete strangers who aren't game developers play your game. And if you go to an education where you don't have something like GGC, it might take years after your education before you get that, because you might get hired somewhere and spend 3 years on a project before it's released, and then you see people play it. But then it's also, you make where will you see it? Will you see playtests? If you're lucky. Otherwise, you might see YouTube clips, or something, or Twitch streamers play it. And we all know how internet is, and people won't always say nice, positive things. But if you're on the show floor at GGC and you see families and kids play your game and have fun and smile, I mean, that's that's incredible. But something more practical, because that's probably what you're looking for. There's a lot of things that I brought in with me, but I think the fact that I got to dive a lot into theory and literature, and kind of start and learn to appreciate it, because I definitely didn't have appreciation for this kind of literature. I always read books when I was younger, but when I came to Visby and we had to start reading game developers or game design literature, I was not thrilled, to say the least. I did not care for it. But the more games I worked on and the more resources I started gathering, the more I enjoyed it. And it's definitely something I still use. I still think of books that we had in the curriculum. I still think of books that I read in my free time, which I also did. I looked up books and stuff like that. I really cherish like that tool, or those tools that I can get from those resources.
What kind of frameworks and ideas from there, or is it more just like? And would you say, did you already start enjoying books while you were here, or was it only afterwards that you were like, ugh, this thing I read actually was kind of useful? So.
I think it was kind of midway through the education when I started actually appreciating the literature and started seeking it out myself. But I think just the research part of it, not just being at work or being in school and doing your work, but going home after and doing my own research, looking stuff up on the web, and not just watching GDC talks or stuff like that, but really getting into some obscure core. I would read Reddit threads. I don't use Reddit at all, but I would find Reddit threads about game design and specific issues that people were discussing and trying to figure out how to solve them, and just sharing experience. I think that's extremely valuable, and I don't know if I would get into it anywhere else, because I wouldn't have someone shoving literature down my throat, so to speak, and making me do it and use it in my papers, so that I was forced to, and then start to appreciate it and kind of realize, oh, you know what, like this is actually really good. Like now I have more tools to argue for my things I believe in when we design features, or when we have discussions.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'm getting sidetracked or if I'm actually answering your question at all.
No, perfect. If it goes awful, then I'll jump in. But it's very good so far. I think I read a statistic once in one of my favorite books I read in management class, not because we had to, but I got it recommended from someone else. It's called Peopleware, and they talk in there about, I think, like 80 or 90% of people that have a job never read a book about their job. So you'd have like a programmer never reads a book about programming, you have a game designer never reads a book about game design, and they were like, okay, this is an awful situation, and you should, as a manager, really figure out how to get your team to read things. And so I'm a bit curious, do you still read literature or articles, or go on deep dives around game design issues on Reddit, or are you kind of too busy nowadays doing things that because we talked a bit before the episode, and I said I think there's a lot of value in being bored a bit, and not being just like from one project to the other, but being bored a bit, or being forced to, like you said, write a paper, and being forced to spend a week to reflect and think about things and find literature. Do you still have time to do that, or are you entirely living off of the storage of knowledge that you kind of accumulated while you were here?
It's kind of both. Like I still do it, but I don't do it nearly as much. I'm not in the mindset of the grind of doing everything I can to eventually get that job when I have the opportunity. So I think there's just a lot of less pressure. There's a lot less pressure on me to kind of put myself in that mindset. But I still do it occasionally when I'm bored, or I have a tiny side project that I'm working on, because I'm lucky enough to have a job that allows me to do my own projects without any issues. And whenever I look into that, I definitely do my research, and still read. I don't read literature as much anymore. It's more trying to just find discussions and people just sharing experience with certain things or issues rather than reading an entire book on a specific topic. Is definitely something I want to do in the future, but at the moment I think I get enough brain food or food for thought, rather. That makes more sense. I think I get enough of that at work to not really have to worry about doing extra research or anything, because I learn a lot at work basically every day. So
by doing or by talking to colleagues, or
both. We're a small team. We're 11 people. I can literally just turn around 180 degrees in my chair, and my director is right in front of me then. So whenever I need any information or any tips, I can just talk to anybody. So I get a lot of hands-on mentoring basically whenever I need it. But by doing as well, I work in engine 99% of my time, so I constantly do new things and break things and then figure out ways to unbreak them, which is a great way to learn. So no, I definitely don't do it now, but eventually I would love to get back into more literature and stuff.
Yeah. And maybe before we move on and talk a bit more about, okay, how did you get to working in engine every day? And because right now we're still stuck in Visby, we haven't even gone off the island again yet. But maybe as a last thing, is there any book or article or piece of literature or talk or anything where you like, if that just jumps to mind, to recommend to people, to say like, oh, this one really influenced the way I think about game design and things? And
yes. There's a book called Gamer's Brain by Celia Hodent. She's a UX designer. I believe she worked at Ubisoft for many, many years and kind of helped jumpstart their UX department when UX was still very new in games. I think, don't quote me on it. I'm like 90% sure that's the story. But she's absolutely brilliant. And that book definitely really changed the way I look at my work from the player's perspective. It really helped me try to figure out, it helped me try to balance between what I think players will do versus what I already know players will do, because it kind of gave me some information about players' attention span. It focuses a lot on short-term memory and knowledge retention, and how people actually experience things versus how they remember those experiences and those kind of things. And I think that's absolutely invaluable for a designer or a level designer, because it's one thing how people play your game, but what they will remember about your game is very different from that, and that's also very important. You want them to leave your game remembering certain things and thinking certain things. Yeah, I definitely would recommend that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, make sure to send me. I wrote it down now. I'll try to put it in the show notes, and then we can just link up after and make sure I got the right book. Cool. But yeah, cool. That's a nice thing. And now let's talk a bit about, okay, you didn't just in 2020 go to Keepsake. I don't know if they even existed 2020 already. I'm not sure. I think it's quite young studio, right? I don't let's not get you fired. Let's move on. But yeah, and so talk a bit maybe about you leaving from Visby and what your next steps were, and or I guess a way what I'm also looking forward to is to hear a bit about what did you learn after you left here that you wish you would have known while you were here, right? And I don't know, 2 questions. Decide which one you want to answer first. I'll come back to the other one. But yeah.
I think I'll start with the latter. It kind of got my brain going. Things that I wish I knew when I graduated, right? More or less, is that a question? I think, there's obviously a ton of stuff. Like I got a lot of more practical experience, a lot of more hands-on experience. those 2 years after graduating from Visby or leaving Visby before I got hired. But I think the big thing is kind of just learning what recruiters or companies expect from people when they're hiring them, and just kind of learning more about what you actually do as a game developer. Just kind of more reality of actually being in the industry. I think the big thing for me was just getting a better understanding of portfolios and how to present yourself, and just how to basically look for what I want. Because I don't think there is one perfect way of presenting yourself. There's no perfect formula. It really depends on who you are and what you want to do and where you want to be. But I think the importance of a portfolio was definitely something that I didn't really understand at all during my time in Visby. Towards the end, during the last semester, I did make a portfolio that was all right, but it wasn't portfolio that would have landed me a job the way my newest portfolio did. It was very much a student's portfolio, and it often really shows when you see a student's portfolio and you see a portfolio of someone who has a bit more experience, or at least did their research and seen a bunch of other portfolios.
And do you have some tips on, number one, how can you during your time studying here kind of give yourself the best chances to actually make a cool portfolio at the end of it? And then two, how do you avoid being a newbie student portfolio and get into the realm of having something that might actually land you a job?
Right. I mean, I think the most important thing to think about is that no one's gonna look at it for more than maybe 30 seconds. So it has to be, unless you're very lucky, of course, but it has to be very engaging really quickly. Like it has to be very straight to the point. Like, you think about it as if you were making a 30-second game and you try to just make it really cool in 30 seconds, right? Basically game design it, think about it from the perspective of someone who's gonna have those 30 seconds maximum to look at it and try to figure out, okay, so what really matters here? Also, they might look at it for 30 seconds, but they might, pass it on further to someone, in the hierarchy who might spend a bit more time looking at it, maybe a fellow game developer, and they might look into it more deeply. So you still got to make sure that there is, food for thought. There's some interesting stuff that will make them go like, oh, you know what, this person knows what they're doing, and they put in the effort and they did the research. So that's very important, I think.
Yeah. And I can just say maybe a couple words, and we can talk about if we want to link your current portfolio in the show notes so people can look at it or not. I don't know.
Yeah, of course.
I think your Wix subscription has ran out at this point, so I don't know. But there's a little banner there. But otherwise, I think like it's a very good one because you have like good header image, right? Like lots of videos, gameplay videos. Then when you show your 3 games off, there's a lot of like moving images, gameplay videos there, right? And then when you talk about having a bit of substance, I really liked about your portfolio, for example, that you have an in-depth article almost about how you approach combat design, right? And where you talk about your philosophies and different environment types and enemy types and build a whole framework for combat design. And so I thought maybe you can speak a bit on that, because you hear this with like programmers, right? They're told, okay, put some example code in there and write a bit about why did you design or engineer this feature, this code the way you did. And maybe you can talk a bit about how you approach this kind of adding substance to your portfolio more from the perspective of a designer. Because if I'm a designer, I'm like, okay, how do I showcase or talk about the substance behind my work, right? Because it's maybe a bit more difficult to sit there and say, well, I played around with the fine tuning for I don't know, the vehicle parameters for 3 hours and now it feels good. It's like, okay, that doesn't mean anything. How can you, right? Maybe you can speak a bit to that and on how to get some substance.
How to get some substance? I mean, I think the combat design part of my my portfolio is a bit different from the rest of it, because it's essentially just all of the research I've done on combat design kind of compressed. It's not all I've done from my research. It's a very compressed version of it, just kind of the quote unquote marketable parts of it, you know, stuff that is very digestible and kind of shows, you know, that can be applied quite easily when it comes to workflow and approach to doing things. I definitely omitted a lot of information, like, you know, it takes this many milliseconds for a human brain to react, so you have to add buffer time so that there's minimum amount of time for people to react to enemy's action, or, you know, more like in-depth stuff that really you're not really gonna use that often.
I think it's one of your things though, that the average reaction time is like 16 frames, so you should give 20 frames to, right? It was one of the
I left it
principles.
out. Oh, okay, cool.
No, it's in there. It's one of the. I
actually
think
thought I
it's the
left it
very
out.
first principle, actually. I think,
Okay,
yes.
yeah, it shows I haven't looked at that portfolio in a while. Might need an update. But yeah, I mean, it's again, it comes down to, you know, kind of approaching it as a game designer and just kind of looking into, okay, what will actually be interesting for a reader, and what will put me in the right light, you know, what will make me look competent and show that I put in the work and that I actually know how to use this knowledge. Because, you know, I can say that I read, you know, 100 books, but what do I actually get out of those 100 books?
No, but that's the thing that really stuck out to me, because this seems like a very well like synthesized and put together piece of knowledge, right? Where you have like, okay, I pull all of these different concepts and I create a new framework that's very practical and applicable. And I think this is like, at least in my opinion, a big deal part of what you do as a designer. Oftentimes it's like, think about how do all of these puzzle pieces fit together? How can I now put it together? And it shows that you really deeply understand the topic, because you're not able to as concisely and precisely and focused in such a focused manner describe these sorts of interactions, or a sub-discipline of design, if you haven't studied it and thoroughly understood it, right? I think another question I had is, so this is, I talked a bit about substance. How is it, because I assume, and this, I know this is very true for me, I did a terrible job during my time studying to make sure that we had gameplay recording of our games. We have, I think, like 2 video clips of like someone playing our arcade machine at GGC. We have like such a terrible job of documenting it. And I see like your portfolio, like I mentioned, a lot of great gameplay recording, etc. Do you have some tips around, apart from just do it, like how do you actually do it? What do you focus on? When do you record gameplay video? How much do you need, etc.? Like what are the steps to really documenting a game so that you can put it into your portfolio later? What can students do to make sure that they have enough material at the end of their education to put something together?
You know, it's really funny because I was never very good at it. So when I was working on my portfolio, I would scour all the Discord channels, all the Google Drives, you know, all the private messages, and just, you know, stuff I sent to my friends, stuff that would send back and forth among, you know, inside the development team. And you basically use every channel of communication, even just message people and ask like, hey, you know, do you actually have any footage of this? Do you have any screenshots? And try to put things together. And sometimes, unfortunately, I would build a certain part, you know, of portfolio, like I was talking about, you know, a certain part of the process. I would have to build that section around the footage I had, because I didn't have the things I necessarily needed. But then I would also go into the engine and, you know, create new materials in engine, you know, once the game was done, because sometimes you have old meshes, sometimes you have an old version of a level, you know. So in a way you can kind of fake it, and I think that's fine. You know, you don't need super authentic images from that specific time in development. What you're trying to do is convey information and show that you understand the process and that you think about your work and you consider pros and cons and things that didn't necessarily go well. I think that's a really big thing when I think about it. Being able to admit your mistakes in your portfolio is, I think, really big, because it shows that you can look at your work in a critical way and say, hey, I messed up, but here's what I learned from it, and that's why I'm a better designer for it. So I have a lot of that. I spent quite a lot of time in my portfolio saying, hey, this is a thing I messed up, and here's another thing I messed up, and here's another one, and just going through all the details of it.
I mean, that's exactly what we had to do here during the education after projects, and 2,500 words of pro memoria. Maybe you don't want to write 2,500 words because, like you said, you have like 30 seconds to convince people to even like read a bit further. But in essence, I mean, the thought process is the same, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. Just show that you can learn from your mistakes.
So let's talk a bit about how did you get off the island, and where did you go? What did you do? And then how did that lead into your job at Keepsake Games?
Sure. So, it was beginning of the pandemic when we graduated. So we all kind of struggled figuring out what to do and how to live a life when the world was seemingly falling apart. At the time, I really wanted to move to Spain and apply for a job there. I didn't do it because of the pandemic. And when I started looking into applying for jobs, I felt very unprepared. I felt like I didn't know how to properly apply. I had a basic portfolio, but I felt like it could have been a lot better. And I felt like I could tell there were things that I really wish I knew when applying. Not necessarily because, maybe I wouldn't get a job. Who knows? It's impossible to say. But I knew that I will feel a lot better about myself as a game developer, just for my own sake, if I learned more before I started applying. I would just feel more valuable as an employee. And a bunch of people were talking about future games, and a bunch of people were applying, and I applied and got it, and that was essentially that. Sorry, what was it was kind of like a two-part question. My road to future games and
then kind of how, like, what happened there and how that led into your job now. And and like you said, maybe now that you also mentioned, okay, you felt a bit insufficient as a game developer, not even only as a game designer, right? Like, maybe talk a bit about, okay, what were the skills that you wanted to develop a bit more and that you got to develop a bit more and that you felt
I think it plays into the question you asked before about things I wish I knew. I think I mentioned the portfolio, and I think here's another really big one. Just being able, the amount of stuff I was able to do by myself in engine. I was working in engine in Visby, but at Future Games, basically all you do is work in engine, and that really gave me a lot of hands-on experience. It made me a lot more self-reliant, a lot more independent as a developer. I think
concretely, that means, like, what does working in engine consist of for Matt on a day-to-day basis? Is it dragging around objects or sliding sliders, or is it actually like scripting things and so on?
It's all of it, really. I'm a level designer and game designer, so I do a bunch of stuff. It's from tweaking things and adjusting values, typical designer stuff, to building geometry or prototyping gameplay with scripting tools, and prototyping mechanics and ideas, and sometimes even prototyping assets when I have an idea and I don't want to bother an artist. Maybe I'll put something basic together myself, and it'd be like, hey, this looks kind of cool, right? Can we have a proper real artist version of this thing? So it's really all over the place. But yeah, I think scripting is definitely a big part of it. the beauty of being able to script or program, if you're on that level, is that you become much more valuable to your team. And that doesn't apply to everyone. Like, there's definitely a bunch of companies where you can be a developer and never touch a scripting tool, or never open Rider or Visual Studio or whatever you use, and be totally fine. Like, you're not going to be required to do it everywhere, but being able to script really opens a lot of doors for you. I spend probably about 20% of my time scripting, 15-20%, I would say. And I don't think I would be where I am right now, like, meaning I wouldn't have my job if I didn't script, solely because we don't have enough people in the company for me to be able to bother someone else about it. So if I want something done, I have to do it. And there's definitely a bunch of places where that is the case. And generally, if you have an idea, for example, and you discuss it with your team, and the team decides, what, we don't think this is gonna work, you can always take your time, build a prototype of it if you really believe in it, and just show up and hand it to them. Be like, hey, I prototyped it. It's actually really cool. Because sometimes it's easy to theorize about things, but it's different when you have it in front of you. So the fact that you can put something together and show it to people by yourself without having to ever bother a programmer or anyone, I mean, that's a powerful thing. It feels really good. First of all, it just feels nice to be able to create something by yourself, and have the ownership of that. But also, just it's a great tool for trying things before you commit to them. Because if I'm a designer and I come up with a feature, let's say, and I think it's gonna be really cool, and I talk to a programmer and they build it for me, and then when they spend 3-4 days building it, and the team realizes, what, this isn't good, I'm not gonna feel very good. I'm definitely not gonna feel good for the programmer, because I just wasted a lot of their time. But it's also gonna make me, not look very good and feel very good, because it's just very inefficient. So if I'm able to prototype it myself, at least I'm only wasting my own time. So I think scripting is very valuable, and again, it opens so many doors, because you might be able to get jobs in places where you wouldn't be able to get them without it. And I just want to clarify, I'm not super good at scripting. I am very much I wouldn't even say I'm mediocre at it. I'm not great at all. But I learn, and I try to always learn new things and get better at it, so that eventually I can become as efficient as I would like to. But even being able to do very simple things or very basic blueprints in Unreal or whatever tool you're using, that's big. I think that's definitely very big.
Being able to self-sufficiently hack together a prototype, even if it's buggy as hell, even if it doesn't quite do what you want it to do, if it does something at least, and you can be like, look, there's something here, and you can hack that together. That's worth a lot. And yeah.
Absolutely. And I don't think it's necessarily just scripting. Like, this, it's just an example from my own experience and kind of with what I do. But I think any way you can contribute to the project and be useful is always gonna be appreciated. The more you can help, the more power you have as a game developer. I'm gonna give you an example. Our CEO, Daniel Kaplan at Keepsake, he's not a game developer, but he's been working with games for, I don't know, 15-20 years now. And even though he's not a game developer, he play tests the game every single day. And he's the one finding bugs and essentially doing QA. He's the one, he's our build master. He's the one making builds so that the programmers don't have to worry about it. And sometimes he'll show up and be like, hey, I made some animations, because we don't have an animator at the moment, and because we don't need one at the moment. But sometimes we're like, what, I thought we could have an animation for this. I made something simple in Unity real quick. So he tries to contribute in any way possible. And even though he's not a game developer, doesn't mean he can't be useful, because he can be useful in a plethora of different ways. And I think that's what it comes down to. Just try to be as useful as you can.
So
Yeah,
find some
yeah.
sort of, yeah, we talked about this yesterday. Don't be a whiteboard warrior, right? Like find some sort
Yes.
of way of how you can get stuff in engine, right? Like whatever it is, even if you're passionate about sound and you can like help out there, or you're passionate about graphics and art, and like you said, like just mock up a lot of like prototype assets and throw them in and test them out before you kind of engage an artist to do a full-on production of the thing. And I guess especially as a game designer / level designer, the more of those you can do, the better, right? So it's a bit of like people say like a jack of all trades and a master of none, right? But how does it finish? It's like a jack of all trades and a master of none is still better. No, a jack of all trades. I can't get it together. Whatever. But the point is that it's good if you like as many of those things, if you know a little bit at least about all of them, then like, okay, maybe you can do some animation and you know how to get the game built and you can Google your way through that, and right, just like keep collecting these little like useful tidbits along the way of how you can contribute.
Absolutely. Although I think it's very important to specify that that's very much the small time developer like indie mentality, because if it might definitely still work if you work at a triple studio, it might still be a very good thing for you, but that doesn't necessarily have to be a case. There's definitely a lot of places where you can just be really good at one single thing, and they're gonna love you for it, and you're gonna have a great job and a good time. So again, it really comes down to figuring out your own kind of path and your own goal in what you're trying to achieve. Sure, it's really nice to be as useful as possible, but if you're extremely good at one task and you get hired for that one task, you don't need anything else because you're already as useful as you can be. So yeah, take what I said with a grain of salt, because I think it's a very case-to-case basis kind of situation.
There are different paths to success, and I guess maybe this is a good transition to talking a bit more about how you actually got the job at Keepsake, and talked about this a bit also how that process was. I know this happened in Future Games through the Ting process that they have, where it's like a meet and match system with different game studios, and I found it very interesting when you talked about how that experience was for you, and how, yeah, like you said, like the thing you wanted out of your career does not necessarily line up with what other companies are offering, and vice versa, and how that I don't know, maybe talk a bit about that, and how did you even get to a point where you knew what you wanted, and then how did that influence your kind of different discussions with different companies?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it took me. I started making games when I was 12, and I got hired not just a couple months before I turned 26. So it was a 14-year journey, right? So it took me a very long time to figure it out. I figured out that I wanted to be both level designer and game designer, or at least one of them at a time if possible. I mean, about 2 years ago, early Future Games, I would say. That's when I was like, okay, this is it. And I have a huge passion for combat and enemy design, so that's also something that's kind of lingering somewhere. So who knows where I'll end up being eventually. But I mean, it was literally just me making games and trying all sorts of disciplines, from illustration to 3D art, 2D art, concept art, management, level design. I did most of those things, and it was just trial and error. It wasn't really some magical journey, finding myself or anything like that. It was just doing things and enjoying a lot of them, but trying to figure out what brings me the most joy and what I feel the most comfortable with, and where I feel like I can really excel and just prove myself, really.
Was there some sort of moment where like the needle dropped? I don't know if that's the right expression, but it like clicked and you're like, this is the thing I really enjoy, or this is at least more enjoyable than the majority of the things I've done before, and kind of How did that happen, or what was that moment for you? Is there anything concretely that comes to mind, or was it just a very long, slow, torturous process?
I mean, I don't think there was a proper moment when I was like, hey, okay, this is what I want to do. But still back in Visby, there was a project during the second year when I did level design because we didn't have someone else who could do it. So I was like, hey, I've done level design before, 2D level design, but I've done it. So I might as well just, do it in 3D and the team will be happy that they don't have to worry about it. And I really, really enjoyed it. And at the time, I wasn't really thinking of being a level designer at all. But it was kind of the first step towards that. And then in the future projects at future games, whenever I had a chance to do level design and, people would ask, okay, so who wants to do it? I would always volunteer because I already done it before. And then with each new project, I was like, you know what, like this is really cool. I'm getting better at it. I'm really enjoying it. So it was kind of like a slow burn before it really hit me. I don't think it was a particular moment. But yeah, no. So my road to kind of ending up at Keepsake, like you said, I met them during the Ting, the meet and greet event at Future Games, and it's funny because I actually learned about the company about a week or two before that. I saw a post on LinkedIn. I think it was our director or Philip or someone just posting like, hey, we started a studio. We're a small startup doing this cool space game, and I thought it was very interesting. But since it was 5 people, my first thought was instantly, oh, they're not gonna want an intern or a junior designer. They're gonna look for someone with experience because they're not, they're a small team and probably limit the resources, and they'll want someone who can really, min-max their budget, so to speak. And then just a few days later, I learned that they were coming to Ting. And I don't remember if I signed up for the interview with them or not. It was a long time ago, but I eventually did get the interview with them. And I did some more research, and I kind of looked into who was in the company, and I was like, oh, okay, these are some really serious people who founded companies before, very, very successful companies before. And our CEO, Daniel, I wrote a paper during my exchange semester in England. I wrote a paper for a business class, and I had a paragraph where I was actually talking about him. So I wrote, it was very surreal to then meet him at the Ting and have an interview with him. It was a really weird experience. It's still kind of weird sometimes, just thinking back at it. So I had an interview with them, and it went really, really well. And they liked certain things I did before. They liked certain things about my portfolio and the kind of things I was focusing on. And just a few days later, they emailed me and asked, hey, do you want to come to the office and meet the team? I met the team, and at the time I was talking to a different studio, and they had a very convincing offer.
Keepsake had, or the other
and the
studio?
other company had a very, very nice offer that was very convincing. And I was talking to Keepsake at the same time, and I was still going through the process with the other company, and I got a call from Daniel, from our CEO, and he said, hey, okay, we really like you. We want you to come in. We need to know in 3 days. And that was not enough time for me to go through the process with the other company. And I, looked through the pros and cons and just thought about what I want to achieve and about how I really like, smaller environments with less people, and, that kind of Keepsake is basically a bunch of friends making a game together. All the founders of the company are old friends from long ago. so that kind of environment just pulled me in. That's kind of where I wanted to end up eventually anyways. So it felt perfect. So yeah, I got the internship. I was there for 6 months as an intern, and they were nice enough to keep me and pay me for it, so I don't have to live on CSN anymore, and
Can make some positive money finally.
yeah, and I can afford to pay off my debt for CSN. So it's kind of reverse CSN at this point.
Yes,
they're taking my money instead of giving it,
but it's kind of funny that you say like it's the kind of place you wanted to end up in, because you mentioned, oh, I was thinking about starting a studio of my own at some point, and so now you kind of get to ride the roller coaster, but at least you don't have to like put the rail in front of the cart while it's zipping along, right? Like
Exactly.
you don't have all the responsibility of having to like raise the funds and run the whole thing, but you get to be part of it. I mean, you're like, what, you're 11 people now or something you said, so you're like employee number 10, 11 or something like that at the company, or maybe even earlier.
Technically, I'm the first because I was the first person to sign the contract. So technically, I'm the first employee at Keepsake.
Well,
very technically speaking.
Well, that's cool though, right? That's so like
absolutely.
That's in a way that's a perfect match, right?
Yeah.
I'd love to talk a bit, because we don't have to end soon, but maybe if we can chat for another 5 to 10 minutes. Sure. And I'd love to hear just a bit more about and this is, I think, very interesting to end with, is just what does your day-to-day look like, right? So this is a bit like a level designer, what do they do? Or like game designer, what do you, and you talked about this a bit, like, oh, this is vastly different from company to company.
Oh yeah.
What is it for you? What does the day look like, the week look like, right? When do you have meetings about what you should do? How often do you get feedback? When do you hand things off to other people, etc., etc.? Just walk us through a bit, like the process that you go through on a day-by-day and week-by-week basis at your job.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because since we're such a small company, and our kind of approach to the work environment is that everyone gets a lot of ownership. And since I do both game design and level design, I'm often very much all over the place. There's periods of time where I basically just build levels. We have certain deadlines and stuff we try to meet internally. So sometimes, we just got to focus on that one thing and get that done. But for example, at the moment, I work on multiple levels simultaneously. We're working with geometry, conceptualization. We don't have an in-house concept artist, or any concept artist for that matter.
Sorry to interrupt, but if you and this is maybe already like, I'm trying to avoid lingo, right? So if you talk about geometry, about concepting, can you be very kind of specific about like, okay, I take cubes and I put them in the level, or like what does it look like, right? And like concepting, okay, we stand around the whiteboard and we do sketches and they look like this. Like, can you maybe dive into that a bit?
So for example, one of the things I do at the company is something we call side destinations, which are basically contained levels that are randomized throughout the game. So they're not part of the main campaign or anything like that. They're sprinkled. There are levels being sprinkled in between all the like quote unquote important content. And those side destinations are about probably 60% of the experience, if not more. And I build most of them, at least at the moment. So because of how quite horizontal our company is, no one really tells me what to do with them. I might get some tips or some general direction of like, okay, we're missing this kind of content, let's try to go in that direction. But I am the one who, finds some sort of inspiration, some visual references, whatever I need, try to get a visual understanding of what I want to build. I'm the one coming up with the gameplay parts of it, try to figure out what kind of experience I want to build in the level, what I want players to feel or see or do. then I build the environment. Either I white box it or use assets or mix it. It depends on the level. Sometimes I go straight to assets. Sometimes I do the mix. Sometimes when something is a bit more complex, it's a lot easier to work with geometry, with cubes and whatnot. I use Pro Builder since we're using Unity, because it's a lot easier to remove things and tweak things. Usually assets take more time to get it to be exactly what you want. So if you're prototyping something, you're experimenting, it's a lot easier to just use geometry, like simple geometry, cubes, etc. Because it's just a lot more efficient. So yeah, I kind of create my own process, and I'm still in at the point where I haven't fully figured my process out, and I try to be conscious about things I do and the way I do them, and try to self-reflect a lot and change my process and try to figure out, okay, where am I efficient, where am I inefficient, how can I waste less time, how can I make things better, etc. So that's kind of my level design process at the moment, right? I take it from the very idea to the point where it's playable. Once I have the geometry, I will script it. I will script events and different parts of the gameplay. I will do kind of scripted events, like some sort of a monologue comes up, or we press a button and the thing happens, or enemies spawn, or or sometimes even script basic puzzles and stuff like that, environmental interactions. So I basically take it from the point where you press create new scene, to the point where it's playable and you can put it in the game and play, and people play it. And if I need someone to play test it for me, I'll ask people to play test it, and and sometimes I just put it in.
But there's no clear kind of, okay, once I've reached this point in the level, then it goes off to this person, they play test it, then there's a feedback. Is this something, but if it doesn't exist, then this is something that you could build for yourself, I guess, in the future, right? So this is part of your responsibility to think about, okay, like you mentioned, like discover, okay, what process actually works for me or for the team and for the game. Am I correct in that? Or is it just something where, okay, right now there's only the CEO playing the game, so like you just put it in, he's gonna get to it eventually, and then
right. Well, so I mean, we do internal play tests. Sometimes we do it a bit less when it's just unnecessary. We definitely try not to waste time playtesting when it's not needed. But yeah, I mean, again, it's a small company and everyone's kind of within the reach of your hand. So we just discuss things a lot. So if something needs testing, or if you want feedback or anything, you just turn around and ask someone for that. And since it's a new company, and we're still in the kind of semi prototyping stages. I mean, we're quite far into development, but there's still a lot of things we're figuring out and trying to narrow down to exactly what we want to do. The game is kind of building itself almost, so we're still at a point where we try things out, and we are still figuring out our process and our pipeline, because it's still very, very much evolving on weekly basis. So we don't add structure where we don't need it. If we were 25 people, we would need structure because we would be too big to be able to sustain our current workflow. But so I think the small size of the team is very much a strength, because again, everyone gets a lot more ownership, and you get to try out a lot of things and kind of figure out your own way of doing things.
Another question I had around this is, because for me this was always interesting to hear, and I talked in the last episode with Timo a bit about it, how they document things, for example. I don't know how much we talked in the episode, we talked in the pre-interview, but as well, where it's like, for them, they do like live content for hill climb racing too, and so they like have different ideas. They have a big sheet, and then they schedule things, and then you can see kind of, okay, this has gone through QA, this is ready to be launched, etc. Do you have some sort of design document, right? Like this is always a big thing, like, oh, make a one-page design for everything. Oh, don't make design bibles. Oh, and then sometimes people are like, okay, we never write stuff down and we just build it and play it, and that's fine. Like, where on that spectrum do you sit, not only personally but also with the company? Like, do you write things down? Do you have, I assume you have like a basic like agile board where you do a bit of like task management and do a bit of like stand-ups and feedback and review, or not at all? Or is it just like post-its or notes on a whiteboard and people go in and dramatically erase it when it's done? Or like, how does that look like for you?
We have stand-ups.
No
essentially it.
artifacts, or like no board or anything that you keep track of things, or
So again, since we really aim for, you know, giving people ownership of their work, it's kind of up to you to document your own tasks and what you want to do, and you can do it the way you want to do it.
how do you do it then? Like, if like, sorry to interrupt, but like,
No.
if someone plays your level and you're asking for feedback, and they're like, oh, this, that, the other, here's a bug, there's a thing, like, do you just sit there with a pen and paper and write it down and then cross it out once it's dealt with? Or do you, how do you do it just personally?
I have a very, very fat notebook that keeps getting thinner and thinner every day as I rip out pages after I'm done with things. But yeah, so going back to kind of the beginning of your question, we have stand-ups 3 times a week. We don't really use much documentation. So we have like a big overarching document for kind of, it's basically almost like a pitch where it just kind of explains the gist of the game and what we're trying to do. But I don't think it's being updated a lot. I don't think we're really looking into it too much, because again, the game keeps evolving all the time. So for us, it's just not worth putting the effort into rewriting things, because we're not going to gain anything from it, really. It's much easier for us to just discuss things, and whenever something comes up that we think is worth writing down somewhere, we do it. So it's a very agile in that sense. We put documentation where it's needed. For example, we have a level design document that is basically 101 of level design, some tools, some you know, concepts, some things to kind of make you understand, you know, what we're aiming for. But it's also something that evolves, and that's not necessarily being updated super much either, because also it's just not worth it at the moment. You know, it would make much more sense if we had a lot more new people coming in, because then you want some resources to give them for them to have an easier time getting allocated and used to, you know, the way we work. But since we are not really hiring much people, it's just, it wouldn't really benefit us in any sort of way. I think the biggest part of documentation is our AI design, which I'm also involved in as of recently, because that involves a lot of variables and a lot of details and nuances. And that's, you know, it's very programming heavy. So I think that's where documentation shines the most.
And it sounds, yeah, sorry to interrupt, but it also sounds like a part where there's more collaboration going on. So the documentation is needed, right? To have this communication that you talked about that just doesn't exist because there aren't 7 level designers working on things, right?
Right. I think you're close to it. I think what really makes it work there is the fact that it's a very, very long process that's gonna take months and months and months of work, and things would get lost with time if we didn't write it down. Whether as, you know, if we're making a level or assets or, you know, a feature, you know, that's usually days or weeks. So you're not gonna lose that information because it's being, you know, talked about and you know, created, you know, on like day by day basis.
Yeah.
So I think it really, like, we only use documentation for the big overarching things, and we try to not use it for small day-to-day stuff.
So you document the philosophies and the kind of pillars and so on, but not the day to day. And I think this makes a lot of sense to an extent. I don't know if you read it, but Lean Startup by Eric Ries is a very kind of big entrepreneurial or like management book, and he also talks about this in terms of documentation internally at the company, where they were like, okay, we don't have any onboarding material for people. And then when they hired someone and they were like, I have no clue what to do, then I was like, okay, your first job is to figure out what to do and write it down. So like the first job of the person was basically to make the process better for the next person. And it turned out that like the first task you always had in his company was like, if you join, you read through the onboarding documentation that there is, and you see, okay, if there's anything over the first week or so of you working that you need that doesn't work, that right, then it's your job to fix that, so the next person doesn't have to suffer through that anymore. And the very first person just drew the short straw and had to like make it from scratch, I guess, the first version of this document. But so I think what you're saying is a very, it might sound like crazy to some people to like, you don't have a perfect scrum board, but it's like, okay, like first of all, like you said, in agile, right, it's kind of, you get to do things so that they work for you and your team. Exactly. And then it's, you don't waste the time writing documentation, right? Agile principles, working software over comprehensive documentation. So it's a very kind of, it seems reckless, but I think it's probably very efficient because it allows you to move very fast and focus a lot on shipping features rather than writing pages of documentation.
Absolutely. And again, if at any moment you feel like you want documentation, you just do it. No one's stopping you from it. Like, we don't have a philosophy of like, don't write things down. That's not the case. We just we don't want to waste time when it's not necessary. And we have people who use Trello boards, and we use it when it's needed there because they it's useful for them. But agile. Scrum, baby.
Yes. I don't know if you remember that in first year we had this lecture come in for a guest lecture. It was like, agile is a lifestyle. It's not.
Oh yeah. I remember.
Yes. No, that makes me think of that. No, it's been super nice chatting with you. I think we're running out of time slowly. Do you have any last parting words or parting wisdom to people that are currently still here in VSB, that are about to graduate, that just started, apart from reading Gamer's Brain? Is there anything that you'd recommend for people to do to, anything from your side?
I think I do, and I think it's really, really boring, so I apologize in advance, but make a lot of portfolios. I did one every semester for 2 years, and by the fourth one, I started getting what I needed. So yeah, just iterate on it. Treat it like a game. Your fourth game is gonna be better than your first. So yeah, just make games and then get good at showing your games, I suppose, and have fun. Because if you don't, then it's gonna be rough.
Yes. Yeah. Even though there is no such thing as fun.
Oh yes, sorry. Have valuable entertainment time.
Yes. No, I think it's a very good kind of piece of feedback, and one of those things. I mean, I didn't do it so far, and like I've made a couple websites and pages and so on, and you do get better every time. So I think it's very important. But it's the same with like Timo that talked about it in the last episode. He applied to a new job every month for 3 years, and at the end he was on application 20 something and he got a job. And it's like, you kind of have to go through the shitty ones to get to the good one. And so it's a very good point to say, okay, do that with a portfolio. It doesn't matter how bad the first one is because it's not going to get you a job. But if you know that the fifth portfolio is the one that gets you a job, how do you get to the fifth portfolio kind of as fast and painlessly as possible?
But, again, you said it better than I did. Very nice.
I'm just listening and summarizing. But thank you so much for joining me today. And also thank you for kind of inspiring the series. We met in Stockholm a couple months ago, and you went into a rant about how people need to script if they want to be designers. And that was a bit like, more people should hear about this probably. So I started thinking about doing this talk series. So it's thanks to you or all your fault, depending on how you want to look at it.
I'm very humbled that my rant was able to actually inspire something more productive than me just being frustrated. So I'm very humbled, and thanks for having me. It's been super nice.
It's been a pleasure. All right, we're going to stop the recording now. Next recording will be in 2 weeks from now. If you join live, then you can hang out with whoever will be the guest after the episode. Might change, but so far it's looking like we're going to talk to someone that actually did do their own studio right out of the education here. And that's going to be an interesting conversation. And so if you have any questions or want to chat to the people that we have on, then make sure to register for the live recording so you can hang around afterwards and chat a bit during the Q&A session. Otherwise, you can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find us on the Gotland Game YouTube channel, and looking forward to talking with you again 2 weeks from now. Goodbye.